Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Stately Office Hours. This time, we should also be broadcasting on Twitter, which is very exciting. Thanks to Matt nudging me to get it sorted out today. And so if you've joined us before, you know that the situation is we want to come on every week and talk about what's going on at Stately and with XState. We like to answer your questions. If you have any questions or feedback, you can ask us in the Office Hours channel on our Discord. And if you are not a member of our Discord yet, you can join it at discord.gg/xstate, or you can ask using hashtag #StatelyOfficeHours on Twitter, or if you send us an @mention, we should be able to pick that up as well, or just in the YouTube live comments. And they're extra nice because we can actually bring them up on screen. So that's the fancy way of doing it. Let me introduce you to the team, or rather let the team introduce themselves. I'll go first because I have the floor. I'm Laura Kalbag, and I do the designer and developer relations here at Stately. Who's next? Matt, why don't you go next as you're ahead of me in the feed?
I am, because I came to the StreamYard early, so I picked the lead. Yes. I'm Matt Beckock. I do been working on the VS Code extension, working on the visual editor, front-end developer.
David?
Yeah, I'll go next. I'm David Khorshid. I'm the founder of Stately AI, and I do a bit of everything. And I also want to mention that today is two of our team members, Laura and Jenny's birthday, or actually Laura's birthday was yesterday. Jenny's birthday is today. They're both really close together. So please wish them a happy birthday in the chat or wherever you want to. Woo. It's really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, very exciting. 1 year older. Jenny's birthday is exciting. Mine less so. And how about you, Anderist? Who are you?
Like you say, I'm Anderist, and I work at Stately, maintain a couple of packages on GitHub and NPM, and I'm trying to say no to some user requests for the features, but I also try to implement other ones. So it's a balance.
It's one of our secret superpowers is saying no. I think you have to do that.
It makes it sound like you're some kind of guru who people have to come to challenge you in order to get their feedback listened to.
No, that was more of a joke then.
Yeah. Your Caesar and GitHub is your Colosseum. Yeah.
Okay, so.
And let's not forget Fazard.
Don't want to act like that.
No.
Hey, I'm Farzad, and I probably have the longest last name, and you don't want to know that. And I'm an engineer in Stately.
There is nothing wrong with your last name. We like to know it.
Okay, if you insist. Yeah, but it's pronounced as Yusuf Zadeh. That's
Yusuf Zadeh.
Yusuf Zadeh.
Yeah. Right. Okay, that was perfect. Awesome.
Yeah. It's a great name. We shouldn't leave it out. So this week, we thought we would discuss again the weekly question. It's been a really great way of getting your feedback and ideas for what we're working on. And so this week actually was prompted by Matt. So actually, Matt, if I say what the question is, will you explain why you wanted to ask it?
Go for it.
The question was, what would you use a visual state machine editor for?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder why we're asking. We happen to be building one of those, and I personally have lots and lots of exciting ways that it could be applied to developer workflows, to your coding workflow, to design workflows, to back-end workflows. Like, you know, we are. There's many things that you can use state machines and state charts for, and the fact that they're a visual formalism allows you to like build them visually. You know, you can build them with pen and paper currently, or you can build them in code, but you don't have a drag and drop visual interface to be able to build them. At least not one like we're building, which is full featured and very, very cool. And I think today, once we've answered the question of the week, once we've done a couple of other things, we can actually show you some of the early designs that we've got for the editor. Is that right, David?
Yeah, and by early designs, it doesn't mean like we haven't started the editor yet. We are very deep in work in the editor. And so these are just designs that we're working towards.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had No Brainer started us off on our Discord saying that the visual state machine editor will be useful for helping bridge the gap between our designers and devs. Firstly, starting with high-level user flows and then ease them into being able to design more complicated interactions and specific flows so that we have a unified language, visual formalism that we can discuss things with. And then he said, I literally have a rolling time slot ready at work to do a lightning talk on the editor once it's available and I know how to use it enough.
Yeah, I think we all do. Maybe not lightning talks, but full conference talks, hopefully.
Absolutely. Bart Veneman said on Twitter, defining state charts as a team collab effort. Done this with great success more than once. So he's been doing it already. Imagine what it's going to be like once the editor gets involved. It's going to be very cool.
Exactly. Especially because the purpose is to make this all collaborative. And, you don't share code with designers or project managers and say, here's our logic. You want a better format of doing that. So the team part is really important.
Yeah. And having that consistent language to use is really useful as well, because the more you use it as a team, the quicker it will be, the more you'll understand each other, the less time you'll spend trying to interpret what each other are trying to communicate.
I know Farzad, you had you've had some experience with processes like where you've seen state charts being built like from other teams, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I've seen state charts built by system engineers and engineers mostly working in Java and C++, these languages. And we had a case in one of the companies that I worked for that we had to talk to other team that was working on an engine. And then we had to, find and discover the edge cases of the model that we had, the state machine that we were developing on the website. And we didn't really have a formal documentation. So we sent over the XState configuration to them. They took a look at the visualizer. They corrected it for us by figuring out how to change the configuration and sent back the new URL to the visualization. And the visualization, though it's not like a visual editor, it's just a representation of the code and configuration, was acting as a common language between these two teams.
It's amazing. There's a great line from a David Harrell paper where he said that his first work, this is the guy that invented state charts basically, one of his early experiences with how cool state charts could be was they had this huge great sort of aviation state machine which was describing all the processes of a plane basically as it was flying, and this pilot was sort of wandering past and he sort of came into the room and said, oh, what's that? And they said, well, it's a machine that shows what your plane is doing. And he looked around the machine, this huge, great, complex machine, many parallel states, all sorts of like orthogonal stuff going on. And he pointed to a little bit of it. And he said, oh, that's wrong. That should go there. I mean, that's what we're talking about here.
That's such a good example. Love it. And actually, that's one of the upsides. As John Lombardo said, selling state charts to the rest of the business. That's one of the things that the editor is going to help with, because if other people in other areas of the business can get involved with it, of course they're going to get on board.
Absolutely.
One thing
James?
I wanted to say one thing to note about selling this idea to non-technical people is that they already think in a state machine. They just don't know that it's available in their workflow.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I find that when I read other people's state machines, because I'm not massively experienced in writing them myself or modeling them myself. And so when I see the ones that you've built, it all makes perfect sense to me. I'm a visual person. It's boxes and arrows, as we so often say. And yeah, it all reads so well. So we should help people get to the point where they can model them easily themselves too.
What's exciting is it feels like it's an abstraction that that sort of matches reality. Like you think of, let's say, so let me pare that down into better language, which is you think of like user stories, which is like describing an app in sort of just like many like if this then this, if the user should see this. Like that's just really hard to work with. Like your app doesn't work like a user story, does it? Like it doesn't, you can't code with user stories. You can kind of validate with user stories, but you can't code with them. Whereas state machines and state charts, you can use the model that they represent not only to code with, but also to understand the project from an organizational point of view. You can say, okay, this state has been built. This event has not been built yet. So could you just grab a task which builds that event and that state? And actually having that as a model means that you can change it really easily. Like, have you ever tried to take a user story document and work out, okay, what needs to change from this to this? Killer, absolutely killer. But having that visual, having that click and drag, and like I think there's not only opportunities here for design tools and coding tools, but also organizational tools. Imagine you can just grab a selection of a state chart and go, okay, I'm going to implement this state, this event, then that's a task. There's so much.
That's so cool. Yeah, so many integrations we could have. And James Tharp said to define like business process flows. So it's very much a part of that. Andrew Harvard suggested collaborative modeling for sure would give designers, developers, and architects, everyone a project team, really, a frictionless way of communicating and improving the overall design, in inverted commas, output. Because that's the thing, we're all, regardless of what our job title is, we're all designing all the time. We're all making these design decisions. So everyone has that role in the output.
Mateusz, did you have any, I remember from a previous office hours, you had some experience with implementing state charts, not in code, but in the, in kind of the planning stages and the organizational stages. Is that right?
Yeah, so it didn't really span a lot of projects, but a particular one that was like giving us some headaches. And yeah, basically it was just a great tool for communication and for the documentation, basically, because we were going back to this like very often and talking with other people, with let's say stakeholders and so on, and it was acting as a source of truth for the future. So it was like referred to by a lot of people, like by designers, because we were actually thinking like how this should work, by developers, because obviously we had to actually implement that, but also to like for our customer support, so they could actually understand it and like all intricacies coming with this, so they could answer questions coming from our customers and so on. So yeah, that, and like the business people were, I think, at least especially like our product owner was quite fond of that approach, or at least this like application of this idea.
I hadn't thought of that from a customer support point of view. That's really powerful too. Like just having like a spec that sits in the center of your organization that everyone understands this is what the app should do, and that is visually editable. Is so cool. We
had this point of reference in a way of, or rather like example in the wild of something like this, and I actually don't remember if this is like a super state charty, but it's a diagram. So there is this diagram of Slack notifications somewhere on their page, I suppose, and how this works. It's quite huge for notifications. So it was also like referred to by the product owner as an example of a great tool to understand it, because it's, even though those are just notifications, under the hood there is a lot of complexity behind like how they are delivered and stuff like that. So that there are like decision trees of sorts and stuff. So it was like already valued by, without actually using that in our project, did this kind of an approach, because like she could see an example of that somewhere else, and it already kind of could provide a value for her to understand that use case and to kind of like actually translate that to how it could benefit us. and it also like popped up in the conversations a lot over the years. And this is diagram. So.
Well, that's really going for it. Fazad, can you remember that the tweet that you wrote, the reply that you wrote? Because I thought you made an interesting point about it being less intimidating to non-technical colleagues.
Yeah, I don't remember what I wrote exactly, but yeah, it comes from experience. Actually, I was working in a few startups in my career, and I always had troubles conveying the concepts of engineering and the solutions that we're thinking about to the stakeholders. And it felt like they kind of they got the business. They had to translate it, to a technical term for us, and then we had to translate our technical solution to the business for them. So it felt like a 2 layers of unnecessary transformation to even talk about the same thing. So everybody was feeling intimidated about that, just because we knew that we were trying and we were struggling at the same time. And at the end, I'm pretty sure that everybody can relate to this, right? I mean, business directors come up with the feature, they narrow it down by the scope, and you get it in the engineering team. You try to, even scope it down and break it down to actionable tasks. And designers design it, but it's different from the spec. You implement it, and it's different from the design. That was different from the spec. And it goes down, and there's a feedback loop until something good enough gets out and gets released. So I think XState charts will help with that a lot. Just that everybody can pin down the accurate definition of each features.
And yeah, I don't think I've ever seen it successfully where the initial design ends up being like the actual implemented product. Like there's always differences between the two, even with the feedback loops. It's never one-to-one, and that's a problem.
And I think that's because like these documents and specs are so hard to adjust. They're so hard to actually go back in time and like, when I've had projects before where there's just like this, literally for each feature, there's a 48-page document, where they've agreed everything with the client and like everything's been gone through. And like those are a pain in the ass to write, they're a pain in the ass to validate, and they're a pain in the ass to code to. And they're incredibly difficult to change. If you could send the client a visual diff of what your proposed new implementation is, see the entire spec in its entirety, see we're only changing this one small bit, we don't need to go through the entire document. I mean, it's just going to transform this level of communication.
Here's another point. It's also a matter of depth of knowledge, how detailed you can get about these specifications. Like a stakeholder, a business director understands that users will have to log in with their account, but they don't necessarily know the details of the authentication. We know that as engineers. I feel like if they saw a state chart flow of authenticating a user, they had a better understanding, at least from a good perspective, a high level layer, like a high enough level of authentication description so that they understand that these are at least finite states that happen inside an authentication flow. And then they would understand the trade-offs that we make as engineers a lot more. Because we usually have to compromise on a lot of stuff. They come up with the perfectionism and the perfect feature spec, and then we have to compromise all the time. And we keep explaining why we have to, accept these trade-offs. In that sense, they understand it from the beginning, and trade-offs are clear from the beginning.
And the same goes for the sort of with design. I think that we have an issue with designing where we often don't design for all the different states we need to accommodate. And you'll kind of get a picture of a screen that's in one particular state, but you haven't thought about the other states, or especially like the odd things that might happen, like the just edge cases perhaps. And so would really encourage designers to think in more of a state-based approach and design in a way that you can actually design for all of those different situations as well.
One thing I found really intriguing is that you can actually start with a design that's more simple. Like the business director can create a state machine that's very simple, only a couple of boxes and arrows with different events going like that. And then that can get filtered through the design team, which then makes it a bit more complex. And then, the designer is going to communicate back, is this change okay? We're making it a bit more complex. We're adding a couple of extra states here. Then it goes down to the developers, where they can say, actually, the designs are just missing a couple more implicit states. Is that okay? Do we need designs for them? Nah, not really. You can see in the designs, like imagine that the design assets are matched somehow to the states as well. So you can see which states are missing designs and see if you need complementary designs for them, like to be covered or not is fine. And then that then gets filtered up the chain again. So it grows in complexity as it goes down the tree. And by the time you're down at the bottom of the tree, you've got all the states mapped out. It's then really, really easy to estimate the task length as well. Like you get a sense of how many states there are and how many transitions there are going to be. You get a sense of how complicated the services are going to be to implement and the invocations and stuff. And you can automate a lot of task estimation. Because really, task estimation is about implicit complexity that's missing. And when you really generate that and you're able to communicate it back up the tree, so much of that is just not going to happen anymore.
I never thought of that. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Okay, we should try that out as a workflow. It sounds like it'd be fun.
Yeah, for real.
I mean, David, you'd have to pretend to be less technical.
All right. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like the longer I work with all of you, I feel less technical and more business side.
You should hit David before he's had his coffee.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We're doing a meeting at 8 a.m. Yeah.
I'm like, how do you spell PHP? I'm not sure. That's how bad it is.
Yeah.
So we thought it might be good to talk about the type gen issues we've been having over the last few weeks. Matthias Anderist, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the frustrations that you've been going through?
Yeah, so we have been working on this type gen stuff, collaborating with Matt a lot on that and testing it. So in a way, like our types are at the moment working, but just in a way because they require explicit type parameters to be given. And without those, TypeScript is just not able to infer some stuff that actually works at the moment. So it's not really preferable, because if you are not using type gen and stuff like that, you shouldn't be forced to provide that generic to like prevent yourself a pain of ending with any's. Yeah, it's a little bit painful because the inference algorithm is just a black box. From our perspective, it's not really described anywhere in detail, and I don't feel like we are doing in those types a lot of weird stuff, in a sense. Like when we end up, I will definitely write down what we are doing there and why, like how is this designed. It might be actually interesting from the design, like the designing TypeScript types perspective, because there are some neat tricks there. But like ultimately, beyond like creating the final type, intersecting with different stuff to make like some properties required or optional and stuff like that. In a sense, it's not really that complicated. The problem is that nested calls are very hard to infer for TypeScript, and it really differs for TypeScript. Like it acts differently if you provide that explicit type parameter, and when it tries to infer that information, because like from the contextual typing, so basically like from like this is also some kind of inference, as I understand that, because like our actions and stuff are not explicitly typed in this context, but they can be sourced from the types of properties and so on, and it just acts differently. So what I would actually like from TypeScript is to either like for this thing to be described better, so like we would have clear expectations, because maybe we just pressure it to match and it's just impossible, at least in the current form. but we can't really assess that because there is no specification. So we just don't know if we are doing something slightly wrong or completely wrong. So that's a problem. And that, like at the language level, what I want to express for TypeScript is basically like skip over something, like don't touch it, like don't infer from here. And there are even like some tricky types like no infer, but it just doesn't work in this case, so it doesn't help us much. But I have been collaborating with some like asking questions and stuff to some people that who are more more comfortable with TypeScript weirdnesses, and we'll try something new in the coming weeks. So fingers crossed, and we'll see how it goes. I have also like created several TypeScript issues already with minimal reproductions, but yeah, that project is just super busy, so no answer yet.
The story so far is kind of like I very optimistically tried something and sort of thought, okay, and I think our approach is still valid, which is basically generating a meta type which you can pass via a generic into the createMachine call. And we've basically, Mateusz, sort of for the last like 8-10 working days or something, you've been deep diving into TypeScript and just finding all these bugs with TypeScript, which is making our implementation sort of impossible. But yeah, so we either need to find a way to work around the TypeScript bugs, or find a new way to do it, or hope that TypeScript improves. And so there's like, if you search for TypeScript issues authored by Andorus, there are like 4 or 5 in there that are kind of we're waiting on, really. So we thought we'd be able to ship it sooner and have everything working, but we're just hitting quite a few TypeScript roadblocks.
Yeah, most of my issues there are like those minimal reproductions and contain things like createMachine, createModel and stuff, even though those are not coming from XState. I just like bisect our code base and try to squeeze the issue into its very minimum. So yeah, if they make out of my like grounds actual like test cases, XState will be mentioned in the TypeScript code base, I guess.
I've just seen John Lombardo's ask a question which is relevant here too. Can you talk about Matt's question on Twitter about deprecating the second config parameter from createMachine? This is basically, I was asking about this kind of because we had an internal discussion about this. One of the problems that we're having with TypeScript is that TypeScript is trying to infer the generics in too many places. So it's trying to, when you create when you pass in context, then you think, okay, the first time that we declare the context, then that should be the generic that it uses. But instead what it does is it actually takes that and think, okay, hold this, and then it looks at your assign calls and it goes, okay, let me try to infer it there and put it together, then takes another one, put it together, put it together, put it together. And it basically makes this sort of ball of mud that you can't work with. The reason it's doing that is because it's in one function call. So it's in the createMachine function call. Whereas if you split it into 2 function calls, if you go createMachine and then you go .withConfig, by that time, by the second time it's done that, then you've inferred the context in one place, it's secured that, and then it goes to the second place and then it doesn't try to infer there. So that's my reasoning there. And that's why we would consider deprecating the second config argument, because they're basically the same, you know. Like if you're declaring your options on the second parameter of createMachine, then you can just stick them in with config. Like it's just a syntax change, and we could even provide a code mod for that. But it's debatable whether it will actually help. It was just a kind of idea that I threw together at the end of a day and put it on Twitter because you need those Twitter content.
Yeah, that was actually a very, very, very good idea. I think like a sort of a step back and look at it and try to figure out something something that can help us. Slight problem with that is that it doesn't help us that much with use machine, but maybe we can just figure out something else there. But definitely it would be an improvement, at least for those problems that we are facing at the moment for the createMachine itself. So we are closer on that front, but still have to figure out something for the use machine, which is annoying.
Basically, we're trying. Mateusz has been in hell for the last 10 days or something trying to figure it out. And we also need to, we want to build a visual editor as well. So we're juggling at the moment.
Good summary. Matt, another question for you specifically. Do you have plans to keep updating XState Catalogue, spelled in the British way? We've actually had this question a few times recently, but let's let you answer for yourself.
There's a bunch of open issues, actually, and a bunch of open pull requests. So yeah, I will eventually when I get some time. But the visual editor is more important. I think the when you have lots of things on your plate, you need to choose your allegiances basically and stick to them. Visual editor is more important. XState VS Code I think is more important. typegen is more important, and then it is probably XState Catalogue. Although yeah, we'll see. There's lots of good PRs there though.
What update are we talking about?
Oh, updates to to add more machines to XState Catalogue, for instance, or to someone added dark mode to it. Damien did. A guy I used to work with called Andy also added a couple of cool components. I've got some PRs open there as well that I just haven't merged. So yes, essentially, I think it's a really great resource. I think it's proved that in the community, and I will keep updating it. Just need some time.
Yeah, lots of things to work on.
I think eventually the registry too can sort of supplant the catalog and basically be exactly what the catalog is right now.
Yeah. I'm just going to jump down to Ronald's question first before we move on to the editor. And Ronald asks, will there be another XState 4 release, or is the emphasis on 5?
We're going to keep making releases to XState 4. Just fixing some, minor issues, and of course, trying to get the typing as good as possible in there. And yeah, so at the same time, we're slowly working on version 5. We really want to get it right. But version 4 is definitely still alive, and it's going to be alive for a long time.
Great. Matt says the transparency about what you're working on and issues you're running into is really appreciated. Yeah, I think it's great to talk about these things. I mean, everyone who's a developer knows that you come across stuff like this, and it's not as easy as saying you're going to make a feature than make it a feature, and it's just magic it up.
For sure. Matt in particular knows about this because he's been working with me and Andres for a while on XState CodeGen too. So his contributions were really, really welcome there, and he's been thinking about this with us for quite a while too. So yeah, he knows what's going on.
Okay, a bit more editor chat. John said, at launch, will the visual editor be able to parse our existing coded machines for editing, or will it be GUI first?
That's an interesting question. The short answer is yes. And so right now, we have the visualizer, and the machines you create in there, via normal code, they're stored in the registry as what are called source files. So basically, they're the raw files, with the JavaScript or TypeScript inside that are parsed into machines by the visualizer. In the same way, the editor can basically digest those source files, grab the machine definitions from them, and be able to visualize them. Now, the two-way editing, might be a little bit more difficult. That's something we have to think about later. But in short, yes, the visual editor is going to be able to parse existing machines.
Fabulous. And why don't we preview one of the little design aspects from the editor. So I'm going to share my screen here. Oh, there we go. We'll go to the side. Who wants to talk about what we're seeing here?
David, you go for it.
All right, sure. So we've been working with a design team on, and by the way, this is not the final design. This is just a very small sneak preview of what we're doing with the editor. So just imagine this, but with compound states, parallel states, everything you expect. And also a left sidebar for navigation, a right sidebar for editing machine, state node, and transition properties, a header, a whole bunch of other good stuff. And so, yeah, this is just, again, to give you a teaser of like just a visual editing environment for these states and transitions that you could drag and drop and manipulate and, be able to hand off. So hopefully this gives you a very, very small idea of what we've been working on.
I just love how pretty it is. Like, look at all the little icons for the little, the do actions, the invocations. Like you see, we're building in descriptions as like a proper part of it too, and we're making everything really easy to read, and it's sort of got that kind of I don't know, like old math textbook aesthetic. Like these lovely thin arrows. These like it just looks really beautiful.
Yeah, and I guess we could talk about like what the current progress of the editor is. So personally, I'm working a lot on the canvas, the edge user interactions, and things like that. Basically, we want to feel like any other design tool, like draw.io or Whimsical or even Excalidraw, like all these tools that you're used to, but something that actually transforms into an actual state machine that you could use in your code. And there are so many small details in there that are really fun to code, really algorithm-y. So yeah.
Yeah, so much of this is going to be about the canvas interactions, about how edges feel when they click, or how events feel when they click to other events. Making things really easy to work with and really obvious. It is at the end of the day boxes and arrows. Like you can imagine, just from point of view of a designer, or product owner, they start with just the boxes and arrows, and then the devs come in and fill in these little invocations and stuff. Everything's so clear, and it's been a joy to work on so far. I've been working more on the kind of the forms for editing the actions and invocations and that kind of thing, a bit of the like navigation on the left-hand side.
Which is nice. It's going to be really nice to not have to type all that out in an XState machine format.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, it's going to be easier as well to get started as well in that way, without having to do that. Fazad, do you want to talk about what you've been working on with the editor?
Sure. Yeah. So David and Matt took the most part of it, and I hate them for it, but I took the styling because right now it looks awful lot like the visualizer and how it renders the visualization. So we're going to take it from there and make it as pretty and as accessible as you see here. So yeah, the look and feel of the modern math books is going to be my responsibility in the editor.
This is Fazad's canvas TM.
Yeah. A spoiler alert, everything that I deal with has a Farzad prefix in Stately.
In his contract. It's very, very weird.
Yes.
Oh, and I think we know that Mateusz hasn't really had much of an opportunity to touch the editor yet, even though he's eager to get going on it.
He's going to be the guy who says no to our in the code reviews like we are.
I will regret saying that. That's a joke.
Yeah, hoping to get you in on it next week.
We have Marco said that I would love to see more examples of XState and Cypress testing and how we can combine both. I wonder whether we should do a future office hours special on testing. We get quite a lot of requests to talk about it and how to implement various options.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jenny, who's not in the office hours right now, but she has been having a lot of user interviews, and a couple of you have mentioned actual testing and how you're using XState for testing. And so I think that there's going to be some improvements to both XState test and also like just examples of using XState with different things like Cypress and Puppeteer and all those things that we could really improve on that, just because we're realizing that a lot of people are using XState for testing, which is awesome, but we do want to make it easier for everyone.
Absolutely. So if anyone does also have feedback on how they've been using it or how they'd like to be able to use it, if you let us know in the Discord, we're always keeping on all of your feedback and really appreciate it.
It does also fold into the discussion we had before about uses for the visual editor. Like you imagine that you have a spec that describes how your app works, then you can use that spec as the testing, as the test model, and you just implement tests as you implement features, and boom, you're off to the races.
John asks, looks great. Have any of you been stress testing the editor as you develop it?
Right now it's in definite MVP mode, but I do go crazy adding state nodes and edges everywhere. There have been just a lot of work just trying to work around React, because with these kinds of data structures, React is not the fastest thing in the world. So I have been cognizant of that, but I think as we're developing it, we're also going to be focusing on performance, especially post MVP. But yeah, that's definitely a concern.
David's been doing really great work on this, kind of stealing techniques from other really prominent Canvas apps, and working around React. Sort of, there's this lovely kind of actor model structure in there. It's really, really nice. But no, I think next week we'll be starting QA probably.
Yeah.
It's exciting. We're getting very close, having something to share with everyone. Speaking of things to share with everyone, we now have our own channel URL on YouTube. We jumped through the hoops. We got there. Thank you to those of you who have watched and subscribed, which has enabled us to actually get the URL in the first place. So that should be much easier if you want to be able to find the office hours every week, if you haven't seen us share a link to it yet. And we are looking at a way of having one URL for you to visit for office hours every week. We are going to work out a good way of doing that. Not entirely sure how we're going to do that yet, but there's lots of different options we could do.
Yeah.
Now, if anyone has, there we go. John asks, do we just see how many state nodes until it falls over? With David adding all of his nodes.
Honestly, yeah, it's going to be a self-correcting thing where if you have too many state nodes in your machine, we're just going to say that's your fault. You need to shrink those machines down.
And that is how you learn.
User error.
Exactly.
Using our product too much. How dare you?
So we said we'd do a short one, but we've ended up running a bit longer than usual. So that's great. Lots of good stuff to be talking about. And so I think that is a good time to call it. And we will see you all again next week. So get your questions ready. You can always send them to us in advance if you have anything that you want us to discuss or anything that you want to share with us. And remember, the last one of the month, the last live stream of the month, we will be doing demo special. So that's another thing to look forward to. So thank you all for joining us. Yeah. And so thank you for being here, and we will see you all again next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.